All right, thanks guys, here we go. I'm going to introduce Michael Bergman, who is a member of the Rural Practice Initiative Committee and also the presenter for a portion of today's program. You all probably know Michael by now and have seen him several times as he does head up your regular programming. So without further ado, here is Michael.
Thanks, Krista, and good afternoon to everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. As Krista said, I've had the privilege of serving on the RPI committee over these last 2 years, and really think it is a fantastic and terrific program. And one of the jobs in the committee that I have had is to actually develop the programming that we've been putting on for all of you over the course of your fellowship. So we hope that it's been a great sampling of the different relevant topics and items that you're thinking about, both as you do this work for the first time in your fellowship and as you supervise our fellows in their work as well. One of the things as the program is evolving and growing that we wanted to spend some time talking about with all of you was pro bono. And so wearing my day job hat, I am here today as the Executive Director of PILI, the Public Interest Law Initiative, which is a statewide not-for-profit that connects law students and lawyers with those in need of free legal services. And today, our topic is the need for pro bono and a virtual way to help. So just to give you a little sense of what ground we're going to cover today, I'm going to tell you a little bit more first about PILI, then talk a little bit more about the landscape in Illinois and why pro bono is so important and needed. Then talk about some of the Illinois rules of professional conduct that are relevant to pro bono practice. Then we're going to dive in a little bit more deeply into that virtual way for you to provide pro bono help, and then give you all a chance to both answer any questions and also, if you're interested, to actually get into the system that we're going to be demonstrating for you today, get signed up, and look around under the hood, if you will. So let's dive in first with an introduction of PILI. So our mission is to engage, inspire, and empower those advancing equal access to justice. We do this through a variety of programs, including a law student internship program, a graduate fellowship program. Our law student interns are those who are currently in law school and working at a public interest law organization in the state and receiving funding by that organization from PILI to support them. Our graduate fellowship program is for those who have been hired by large law firms, usually here in Chicago, and are offering their incoming associates the opportunity to work at a public interest law organization around the state in between graduation and joining the law firm. Between those two programs, we have an alumni network made up of nearly 5,000 former interns and fellows who are doing all kinds of things in the larger public interest community. Sometimes that is working in legal aid and being a legal aid attorney. Sometimes that's in academia. Sometimes it's in government service or judicial service. And sometimes that's in private practice, but doing pro bono work. And then we have our pro bono program. And through that, we are looking at a variety of ways that we can try to get more people help by expanding and enhancing pro bono throughout our state. And one of the pro bono opportunities that we offer is through Illinois Free Legal Answers, which is the site that we're going to talk a little bit more about today. So we have these things called our Judicial Circuit Pro Bono Committees, and these are actually how PILI began to expand from a Chicago-based program to a statewide program. We currently have 11 of these throughout the state. Our slide is actually out of date, and they cover nearly 50 counties across the state over 11 judicial circuits, where we are working with local attorneys and local members of the judiciary to expand and enhance pro bono in that particular community. And in that work, our efforts are largely coordinated by the local legal aid program. So in the central to northern part of the state, that's Prairie State Legal Services. And in the central to southern part of the state, that's Land of Lincoln Legal Aid. And so we work in partnership with them to get more people doing pro bono and more people helped through pro bono as a result of those judicial circuit pro bono committees. So now turning a little bit more to talking about the importance of and need for pro bono in Illinois. I always like to start this discussion with this quote, which is from a former member of the United States Supreme Court, who, during his tenure as president of the American Bar Association, said that equal justice under law is not merely a caption on the facade of the Supreme Court building. It is perhaps the most inspiring ideal of our society. It is one of the ends for which our entire legal system exists. It is fundamental that justice should be the same in substance and availability without regard to economic status. One of the biggest barriers for people trying to access and then feeling as if they've accessed the system and been treated fairly is the ability to have legal assistance. And so pro bono really becomes such a key part of making that concept of access to justice a true reality. So let's talk for a minute about what poverty is and what that looks like to give you a sense of who we're talking about. The numbers here are dating back to 2018, but they don't change very much. They don't even change by the hundreds from year to year. They change by the dollars from year to year. But when you think of what poverty means and the type of people that are looking for free legal help, we're not talking about people who could afford an attorney, but just don't want to pay for one. There's certainly a population of them that are out there, but we're talking about people who are living in some level of poverty from extreme to low income. Extreme being people who are relying almost entirely and exclusively on the limited availability of government benefits to help them. And for somebody who is a single person, that's looking at about a $6,000 roughly income level that they have, with a family of four, about $12,000. When you look at people who are somewhere in the middle, they're not in extreme poverty, but they're not in that low income category. That population probably has some limited amount of income from work, but it isn't consistent and it certainly isn't significant. Somewhere between $12,000 a year for one person and $25,000 a year for a family of four. And then you get to that low income category. That low income category sometimes is referred to in not the way I would like to, but commonly referred to as the working poor. These are folks who do have probably somewhat consistent employment, but are typically making something less than or equal to minimum wage, and with a one-person family, that's about $25,000 a year, and with a family of four, about $51,000 a year. So when you look at those dollar amounts and think about all the different expenses that someone might have, from paying for rent, for transportation to and from work, for feeding and care of themselves and their family, from any other basic necessities that they may be trying to cover with that money, there isn't a whole lot of discretionary money that's left. And discretionary money really is where money from for legal assistance or legal help would come from. So with those amounts in mind, let's look a little bit at the map of Illinois and get a sense for how things look across Illinois. Again, while the map dates back to a study that was done in 2016, there has not been much shift in this, and there isn't typically from year to year. There probably were some negative changes, in fact, not positive changes, certainly coming out of the pandemic and how that has affected people and disproportionately impacted both low-income communities as well as communities of color. So if there have been changes kind of in this data, it would have been to the negative, not to the positive. We've got 102 counties here in Illinois, 12 of which have more than 20,000 people living in poverty, 14 of which have a rate of 18% of high or higher of poverty, and 50 counties that have a poverty rate of between 12% and 17.9% of their population. And so you can see that those that are in those darker shades are the ones that are having the highest levels of poverty. And you can see they're really distributed around the state. It isn't one geographic area in the state that experiences this disproportionate to others, but rather it's really spread out. You see it in northern and southern, eastern and western, as well as central across the state. So talking a little bit more about what poverty looks like in our state, about 1/3 of our population is considered to be living at some level of poverty between low income and extreme poverty. About 6% of the population is in that extreme category. The bulk are at 16% in that low income population, and then 12% are living in poverty, again, based on 2018 statistics. So several years ago, prior to the pandemic, we did have the Great Recession, and we didn't see a lot of improvement for those living in poverty once the rest of the economy started to emerge from the Great Recession. It was remaining still pretty consistent. And again, we see that in communities where poverty is the greatest, it's disproportionately affecting communities of color and women and children, with the child poverty rate here in Illinois being at about 16.2% of the overall population. Looking again at our map to get some sense of what the numbers are in different counties, you can see that Cook is at about a 13.8% poverty rate based on the 2016 data, Champaign at 19.2, Peoria at about 16.6, and St. Clair at 14.8, to give you a sense of a couple different spots around the state and what that looks like. Again, reinforcing this notion that it isn't any one particular pocket of the state population, but rather around the state where we're seeing this. So that's giving you a sense of what poverty looks like. Let's shift now to that, how that relates to the need for legal services. So we see that from recent studies that have been done, again, still pretty distant in time now, that low-income Illinoisans have generally faced an average of about 1.3 million civil legal problems. Almost half of the low-income households in Illinois have at least one problem, with the average being about 1.7 legal problems per household. Take that amount of legal need and legal issues and compare it to the fact that there's only about 420 full-time legal aid attorneys in the entire state, with about 150 of them focused on serving clients who are low income outside of Cook County. So only about 150 for the entire 101 counties outside of Cook. That breaks down to about one legal aid attorney available for every 6,500 low-income people, whereas there's one private attorney available for about every 429 people in the general population. So there is a really great and robust legal aid network here in Illinois. I mentioned some of our partners in that work: Prairie State for the northern and central part of the state, and Land of Lincoln for the central and southern part of the state. But no matter what they do, no matter how much time they spend, no matter how hard they work, they simply don't have enough people on their staff to provide legal assistance to those in need. The other big challenge that we're facing, and that's really what inspired this particular effort with the Rural Practice Initiative, and that you've heard about before, is this idea of legal deserts. That on top of the problem that there aren't enough legal aid attorneys around the state, in some places in our state, there just simply aren't enough attorneys. And so while you have a need for legal assistance, both for those who can pay it and those who can't afford it, you don't necessarily have attorneys available to you who can help. We don't have a map right now that shows you, as an overlay to this, the fact that while Land of Lincoln covers basically everything kind of right in the middle down, and Prairie State mostly everything right in the middle up, they don't have offices in every county. So sometimes the closest legal aid office might be 2 or 3 counties away from you, and it might be a 2 or 3 hour drive to get to in order to talk to an attorney face to face. And so this really gives you a sense of what we're looking at in terms of the attorney headcount. In the 102 counties of the state, we have 13 counties where there are 5 or fewer private attorneys, and 36 counties that have 10 or fewer. So we're getting to about, close to half of the state's counties that have less than 10 attorneys. You can see those in red are the least populated. Those that get to that kind of tannish color are the ones that have the highest numbers. Now, unlike where we saw the poverty distribution being pretty evenly scaled out through the state, That's not true when we talk about the attorney population. You can see that most of the TAN is up in that northeast corridor that is and surrounds Cook County. So there's a real disproportionate distribution of attorneys in the state. The next slide just looks at this from a different angle. And again, this is really showing you that half the state is in this kind of critical shortage category, all of these ones that are in red, with the other ones being slightly better, though something in between when you look at that legend and kind of see how it distributes. And so then the challenge gets exacerbated by the fact that there's also a good number of these folks who are in that head count who are at or near retirement. You all have heard of the baby boomer generation. They are still very much out there in the workforce. Many of them would have liked to have retired by now, but the Great Recession put off a lot of those retirement plans. And now age is going to force some of those folks into deciding to retire. And so, figuring out what to do with their practice, how to ensure that they're still a lawyer in the local community is a big challenge. And it's also a big challenge then when we're turning around and saying, hey, on top of all of those challenges, couldn't you help people who can't afford an attorney? So the need for us to kind of come together at a statewide level really is heightened by the fact that there are some really strong issues within the attorney distribution around our state. So that's why pro bono really becomes the key to filling that gap. There just simply aren't enough legal aid attorneys. The need is huge in good times. When pandemics happen, when recessions happen, when other issues happen, they only become exacerbated. And we have a system where, for the most part, it takes a lawyer, somebody who has gone through law school, passed the bar, who's familiar with this stuff, to really understand and navigate the legal system. Particularly for you fellows, think about those first times that you went into the courthouse and didn't know where things were, didn't know what certain things that were being said by the judge were. You still had some level of training to navigate that. You knew people maybe in the courtroom sitting there with you who you could turn and whisper to and say, what did the judge mean when they said this? You could jot down a note and go back to the office and ask for somebody to give help. Even when the area of need isn't an area that matches up with the kind of work you do regularly, you still have so much more knowledge, training, and understanding of the process and of the words that are needed, that really we have a unique position where we are the only ones who can make this help, right? Non-lawyers cannot go in and represent people or help people in our current structure. Now, all of that to say, there is a lot of great news. A couple years ago in our state, the Supreme Court said that every year when we register, we have to report on whether or not we as an individual are doing pro bono. That wasn't that we have to do pro bono, but rather simply that we have to report whether we're doing pro bono, and if so, how much. So you can put 0, and that is perfectly fine in the ARDC's eyes. But the hope is that, every year when you think about the registration process, you'll think, gosh, I could find a couple hours to help people in need and have something other than 0 there. So in the last reporting period, 31,954 lawyers performed over 1.9 million hours of pro bono legal services. And that range of what makes up that time can vary greatly. It might be a contested custody case. It might be a simple prove up on a divorce. It might be a will or power of attorney. It might be an immigration case, which even though that's in federal court, might be reported under this. It might be a habeas case. It might be a 1983 case. There's a vast range of what makes up that number depending on who's doing the work and where they're doing that work. In addition, there are about 18,000 lawyers who gave about $16 million worth of money to pro bono legal service organizations like Prairie State, Land of Lincoln, or PILI. As good news as that is, what it actually translates to in terms of the active status lawyers, those who are active and authorized to practice law, is that only about 13% of those lawyers in our state are doing pro bono service based on those numbers. So there is good happening, but we certainly need and hope for more. A quote to kind of end this piece is from Justice Rita Garman, who is a current member and a former Chief Justice of our Illinois Supreme Court. And she said that pro bono service is not only personally rewarding, it is an important component of professionalism. By engaging in pro bono service, the attorney helps close the justice gap that affects our most vulnerable neighbors. So now let's turn a little bit more to our rules of professional conduct and talk about some of the aspects of our rules that focus on pro bono. So our preamble says that it is the responsibility of those licensed as officers of the court to use their training, experience, and skills to provide services in the public interest for which compensation may not be available. An individual's lawyer's efforts in these areas is evidence of the lawyer's good character and fitness to practice law. This really is a lofty goal or ideal, but it is not a mandate. So again, there's no requirement in this state or actually in any other US jurisdiction that says that you have to do pro bono work. There are some bars that you can opt to be in, particularly at the federal level, like the trial level courts in the district courts, that may actually require it of their individual attorneys. But at the state level, there's no state currently that says that you have to do pro bono. Here, it's set forth in our preamble as a goal, as something that we should be doing, as something that is consistent with what it means to be a lawyer and what it means to be a professional. So some of the things that have been undertaken to try to advance pro bono here in our state, the Supreme Court has established a Commission on Access to Justice. This was established back in 2012. And has been charged with promoting, facilitated, and enhancing equal access to justice across Illinois. And as of late, their work is really focused on kind of three big areas: standardized forms, language access, and remote access. Remote access was something they were working on pre-pandemic, and obviously as a result of the pandemic, became even more important and is probably something that is going to remain a really huge piece of what we do. The standardized form piece has been huge. One of the challenges was that up until this commission came into place and established these forms, there could have conceivably been 102 different forms based on the 102 different circuits in the state for any particular thing. And so something that was really simple and easy that was going to be similar in practice in every jurisdiction could be made different just by the forms that were used for that. So these standardized forms have been created to try to make things easier for people who can't get free legal services, who are going forward on what we used to call a pro se basis. And as we've tried to move a bit away from the use of Latin, it's now a self-represented litigant basis so that they can prepare these forms on their own with little to no additional assistance and be able to navigate the legal system. And then the language access piece was a huge piece as well. This commission was established when former Justice Tom Kilbride from Rock Island was the Chief Justice. And one of the things he reflected on around this area was that when he went on a tour of courthouses, he rarely saw anything in any of the courthouses that was in a different language. The one example that he said of seeing something in a different language was in the Cook County Courthouse. And he saw some stuff in Spanish. And it was simply to say, this isn't for you, don't come into here, judges only, lawyers only. Those were the only things that were in Spanish. They weren't things that were helpful or directing people, but rather prohibitive signs that were telling people to stay away or stay out, or this isn't for you. And so an effort really began as part of this commission's work to ensure that there's greater access for folks who do speak a different language. So now looking at pro bono and what it is. Again, while there isn't a requirement that it be done, the rules were modified a few years ago to at least provide a definition. For many, many years, there was a lot of talk about what pro bono was and what it wasn't. Could things start out as not being pro bono and become pro bono and things like this? And so finally, through Rule 756F, we have a definition in the Rules of Professional Conduct to guide us in what pro bono is, and to some degree, what pro bono is not. So pro bono is intended to be legal services provided without charge or expectation of a fee. So that's from the beginning. To persons of limited means, to organizations designed to address the needs of persons or communities of limited means, to certain charitable, religious, civic, or community organizations, or by providing trainings that are offered for free to the benefit of legal service organizations or lawyers who provide pro bono service. So to give you some real world examples of what that looks like, representing an indigent client or a low income client in a landlord-tenant dispute, counseling a not-for-profit organization on tax matters, articles of incorporation, bylaws, or not-for-profit status, or developing training and presenting trainings on substantive legal topics or professional conduct topics for pro bono attorneys. Some things that don't qualify: serving on the board where the lawyer is not acting as the board's pro bono legal counsel. So many of us lawyers, like myself, serve on boards. That's awesome. But if you're just there as a director and functioning like everybody else, that in and of itself is not. If you begin to advise the organization on legal issues and legal matters in your role as director, then that would. So a regular director role doesn't, but where you're providing legal advice and representation would. Offering discounted fees, that's awesome. And there are folks who have some amount of money to be able to pay, just not all of the usual fees. And so it's great to do, but it's not pro bono. Attending CLE programming, even if that is CLE programming to help you with your pro bono work, while that can count for CLE credit that's required, it isn't of itself pro bono work. Fundraising for organizations. And then after a client doesn't pay your bill, saying, okay, well, I'll just charge that off as pro bono. That's not really it, right? The rule says that it's at the outset, that there is no expectation of fee. Now, if a client is paying you and at some point the client says to you, I can't pay you anymore, and you say, well, you know what, I want to help you still, and going forward, I won't charge you, all that time from thereafter could be counted as pro bono time. So I mentioned that we do have a pro bono reporting requirement here in Illinois. Again, pro bono is not required, but you have to report whether or not you've done any in some hourly amount from zero beyond. The information is reported, but then deemed confidential and is only reported out to the public in the aggregate. So you saw those numbers early on that I gave you of what people are reporting in total. That's as much as we know. We can't tell how that breaks down based on circuit, based on county. There's no way to identify that reporting of those numbers with individual attorneys or even pools of attorneys. It's reported in the total aggregate. And the intention there was that the court didn't want this to be used to shame people, to coerce people, to do those kinds of things. But the unintended side effect is it really makes it hard for organizations when we try to figure out where to put our energy and our focus, because it's impossible almost to know that pro bono is strong and striving here, but we get in need of cultivation here based on these numbers. And again, when reporting these numbers, you're using that specific rule from 756 to be able to determine the specific definition of pro bono. Another change that happened recently to kind of broaden the pool of people who could help, all of what I've been describing so far applies to those who are active and authorized to practice law. Probably everyone here falls into that category. But there are folks in our state who are either retired status or who are inactive status, or who may have no status in Illinois, but are licensed in another state. Rule 756K allows those categories of attorneys to do pro bono work here in Illinois if they file an annual registration form with the ARDC. It's a one-page form, rather simple and easy, but they must work with an approved sponsoring entity. So Land of Lincoln, Prairie State, Hilly are all examples of those, or law school clinics are often also sponsoring entities. They have to complete any training that is required by that sponsoring entity, but they are otherwise not required to comply with CLE requirements beyond what is required of the sponsoring entity. And again, they must annually register with the ARDC and with that pro bono program to keep that current, that status current.
Thanks, Krista. So I'm going to cover the last few slides from this presentation live because we did add one that I want to make sure that we cover, but also just to get through it a little bit faster so that we can make sure that we have time for our demonstration. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so hopefully you can see the presentation. Are you seeing the presentation?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So we covered that. Can you see the conflict of interest slide, or are you still seeing the retired inactive slide?
We can see conflict.
Okay, great. So this is the slide that we added. I want to make sure we covered. Basically, the Rule 6.5 of the Rules of Professional Conduct cover a limited scope pro bono representation and conflicts of interest, so that you know, if you're at a help desk in a courthouse or online on free legal answers, you can still have a basic conflict check, but you don't have to go through everything you might go through if you were taking on a client for full representation. And that is a frequently asked question that we do get a lot, but there is an ethics rule specifically geared towards that issue. And then we have a quote from Justice Garmon: "Pro bono service is not only personally rewarding, it's an important component of professionalism. By engaging in pro bono service, the attorney helps close the justice gap that affects our most vulnerable neighbors." And so that takes us to the Illinois Free Legal Answers, where that comes in as a pro bono opportunity that is virtual and very convenient and can assist people statewide. So just by way of history, it started out in 2011 through a program in Tennessee. In 2015, the ABA adopted it and created models. And I think there's, I think 43 jurisdictions is where they're at now. I may be slightly out of date with that, but nearly all 50 states are participating, and there is a federal version as well for federal legal aid questions. What is Free Legal Answers? Free Legal Answers is a secure website where qualified users post their civil legal questions. Volunteer attorneys can log into the website, select questions they would like to answer, and provide information and basic legal advice. Users are emailed when their questions are answered, or when they receive a response, and they can log back in and read and respond back and forth. This can be done from anywhere that you have an internet connection, and the American Bar Association provides malpractice coverage for their volunteers. It is basically a legal advice clinic, but virtual. The clients are self-represented litigants who usually have exhausted all other means of legal help. So while when you're answering your questions, it can be helpful to recommend or give them the information for Land of Lincoln or Prairie State, or whatever the organization would be, depending on where their legal issue is. I wouldn't answer a question just to give them that information, because chances are they've already been there and were unable to receive help for some reason. Clients do have to complete an online registration that has financial eligibility requirements, so you are helping somebody who has confirmed that they are in need. And they are limited to asking, it used to be 3, it's now 5 questions per year to make sure nobody's sort of abusing the system. And just to give an example, it can be a conversation, so it can be a back and forth with the client. Oh, lost my spot here. And they might not give you all the information that you need to answer their question in their initial sort of post. And so it's okay that your answer doesn't have to be the full answer. You can have a back and forth conversation. So you can say, I would like to help you, but I need more information about X, and wait for their response. Also, I should say, though there is a back and forth, it's all through the platform, and attorney volunteers are anonymous. So they're notified that an attorney volunteer has responded to them, but it's not like back and forth in your emails. It's a back and forth all on the platform. You can see some user and question statistics here, basically just to show the types of questions that are popular. I don't know if you're able to see all that, but basically family, housing, and work and employment questions are the top 3. That remains pretty consistent over time. And that is on the slides. And now I can do a quick demonstration of what the actual platform looks like when you log in. So first of all, I just would like to point out, if you go up here to attorney registration, this is the agreement that you'll read and click I agree at the bottom here to begin your registration process. But you can always come back to it by clicking that attorney registration tab at the top, and it has frequently asked questions for volunteer attorneys. So this is great because if you log in today, explore the site, see what it's like, and if there's any questions you might want to answer. But later on, you're like, wait a minute, what is the thing about conflicts? What is that professional rule, and what does it exactly say? Or what about confidentiality? Or what if I want to take a case off the platform, which is by all means not expected or even encouraged, but if you do have a back and forth with a client that you would really like to help, there's even information about how to do that, how to help outside of the platform. And then if you would like information about the malpractice insurance coverage provided by the ABA, you can find that here as well. So just like to point out that a lot of the major questions are actually answered on this agreement, and you always have access to that agreement even after you're registered. But we will go and sign in. Every time you sign in, you will see this pop up here asking you to confirm that you're still authorized to practice and in good standing. I know I've just pointed this out because I know when I see pop-ups, my instinct is to say no, X, close, get away from here. But it's actually very important that you click yes if it's true. And then you will see the Free Legal Answers homepage, which shows all the available questions in the queue here. So you can see, you'll see the legal deadline, kind of problem, the party. So you can do that quick sort of basic conflict check by looking at the party name and the subject. The clients choose their own subject. Sometimes they end up putting their whole question in there. Sometimes it's not very helpful, but you can preview the question to get more information. You can also just click on the question. And so this is a bit long, but you can see it says where they're at or where the dispute is. It's in Will County. So if you're overly concerned with conflicts, you can even say, if you live in Will County, maybe you don't want to look at any questions from Will County, and you can click out in order to avoid conflicts that way. Some other features, you'll see that they are sorted initially by legal deadline or age of question. So it's either the question for this red flag, this filled in red flag, the question is either over 25 days old or has an upcoming legal deadline. And then the not filled in red flag for older than 10 days. There are also other tags on here for veterans, if you're interested in helping a specific population like that. There's also 65 plus for helping people that are over 65 years of age. And so you can sort that way. You can also filter. So if you only want to see immigration questions, for example, you can filter, click on immigration, apply filters, and then you will only see immigration questions that are available to answer. So that's great. If the queue is big, you don't have to sort through a bunch of questions that you might not feel qualified to answer, and you can sort of get straight to the topic that you're interested in helping with. I'm going to click into a question here just to show. So this is a good example because it shows that the clients and the volunteers can actually include attachments, which is great. You'll see the opposing party information. You'll see the county. And then if you want to answer the question, you click, I want to answer this question. And then whether you want to answer now or answer later. If you want to save the question, but you don't have time to answer, you can click answer later. And you'll see that it goes back. Now you have your own personal queue above the larger available questions queue. When a question is in your personal queue, it is not available for other attorneys to answer. You sort of pulled it from the larger pool. And you have 3 days to work on that question. If after 3 days you haven't done a answer or reply, the question will automatically go back to the main pool. So you can't, even if you accidentally forget, like, you're not going to prevent somebody from getting the help they need. And then when you are ready, you just click back into the question and say answer now. You'll see a text box appears and you can type in your answer here or your reply. You can see that maybe they haven't given you all the information you would want to know in order to answer this question. So you could say, dear so-and-so, I'm sorry you're dealing with this, but I'd really like to help. Would you be able to tell me what the current court orders are? Is there a current visitation plan in place, or parenting time plan in place? Have you been back to court yet? Have you filed something already? Whatever the question is, you don't have to type out your full response. Like, well, if there's an order in place already, here's what you would do. If not, here's what you do. You know, it doesn't have to be a book, your first response. It can be asking for clarification. And then even though you are anonymous to users, it'll say attorney number, blah, 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 answered your question. Sometimes, or not sometimes, we do recommend that if you have a relatively common first name, that you maybe sign off with sincerely your first name or sincerely initials, just so that they know that it's not like a robot, that it's a real person on the other side. They will, once you hit submit, they will be notified that they've got a response. They can log back in and respond. If this is the type of question where they do give you enough information for you to answer, you can answer fully without asking for clarification, or for whatever reason you don't want to have a back and forth with the client. Once you hit submit, it will give you the option to close question. You can close it. So if you know you want to answer this question, but you're going on vacation tomorrow and you're not going to be looking at this, you can close it so that they know that back and forth isn't available. And then once you do respond, if there's they have 10 days to reply. If they don't reply within 10 days, it's automatically closed. And the same if it ends on with you having the last response. If you submit a question, could you clarify? Could you tell me this so I can answer your question? And they never respond. If they go those 10 days without responding, it'll automatically close. You can also keep track of your hours here. So if you want to do all of your pro bono work through Freely Legal Answers, or just part, but you want to keep track of how many hours for that reporting requirement, you can do that here. Once you submit that, you can go up here to log my hours at the top. It'll show you the hours you have logged so far. And also, like, if you submit this answer and you forget to do this, but you want to do it later, you can go back in and log hours on the back end. But you don't have to. We don't use that for anything. It's totally just a feature for you, for your convenience. If you get to typing an answer and get interrupted, you get a call from a client or you have to go, you can save as a draft and come back to it later. It'll stay in your personal queue, just like I showed you before. And if you get to typing a question, you're like, actually, this is more complicated the more I think about it, and I don't want to answer this question, up until the point where you've hit submit on a response, you can always return the question. So you can say, I want to return this question. It takes it out of your personal queue and puts it back in the main queue for other attorneys to see. So up until the point where you actually submit a response, you can always put it back. So there's no risk that you'll like accidentally get yourself into something that you maybe didn't intend to. There are some other pretty great features. Just to show real quick, we have a training resources tab, which provides this demonstration again. If you decide to not pick this back up until maybe winter break or something, and you want a refresher, you can always come here and watch that. Links to standardized forms and Illinois Legal Aid Online, which is a tremendous resource for client-facing explanations of really basic legal information that actually a lot of people just don't know exists. So you don't have to, if a client is asking you, how do I file a petition for modification of parenting time? You don't have to sit there and type out a whole treatise yourself. It's already done and made for the end user, which is a pro se client, on Illinois Legal Aid Online. You can just search for the type of motion or order that you're looking for, the person's asking about, and you can link directly to that in your answer. So again, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And again, the Illinois standardized forms for some of those basic forms. Illinois Legal Aid Online also has a really great order protection, I guess, program for clients. So we do get a lot of order protection questions on the site, and they have a great quiz that sort of is ask you questions about ask the client questions about the situation and says, what order do you really need? Do you really need an order protection, or do you need a stalking no contact order? And it walks them through that. And then once it tells them what order they are looking for, it will take them directly to a fillable petition so they can start filling it out with guidance on the website. So it's a really great resource for that. We also have some available CLEs linking to Pili's website to help you answer like housing questions. We have a lot more CLEs than are listed here on our website intended for our pro bono volunteers, which include Free Legal Answers volunteers. So feel free to check those out. And then subscriptions are a great category or a great tool here. So if you log onto the site and you want to answer civil appeals questions, but there are none today, you can uncheck this or check it, I guess. And now you will be subscribed to get emails when a civil appeals question is posted, and you can log on and see if that's something you want to answer. This is a great resource if you're sort of the area you practice in is not as common. I wouldn't recommend subscribing to the family safety divorce custody category. You'll get multiple emails a day because that is our most popular category. But this is actually a really convenient way to know when there's something that you might be interested in helping with on the platform. And then question history is the last tool I'll show you just really quickly. I hate that this filter is on here now, but you can go back and look at all the questions you've answered. So if you answer a lot of the same types of questions, you can see I've answered a lot of DCFS questions because that's what I used to do. You can copy and paste basically answers you've already typed and reuse old answers, modifying them as as needed for the specific questions you're facing now. But it's a great way to not have to, again, reinvent the wheel or redo work you've already done. So those are some basics for Free Legal Answers, and really how, I'm not great with technology, and I was afraid when I first logged on about accidentally clicking into something and not being able to help someone after I looked at it or whatever, but it's really pretty stupid proof. And I'm the perfect tester for that. And I love using this platform as a pro bono opportunity. It's really easy. A lot of the resources already exist right on there. And, some of the responses we get from clients, because you can have that back and forth, are pretty great. And you can see the real-time impact it's having on the people that you're helping, because they will tell you, great, thank you. I was finally able to file this today and get into court. These are things that just for lack of resources or lack of knowing that some of these other resources exist that people wouldn't have access to otherwise. So that's the short version of how you can really have the most convenient pro bono opportunity ever online, because you can, even from a help desk perspective, with a help desk, you don't know what type of a question is going to come in that you might not know the answer to, but here you can choose on your own time, wherever you're at, on your couch, questions that you're comfortable answering, and you can take as much time really as you need to answer the question. So it's really a great resource for attorneys as a pro bono opportunity, but also for self-represented litigants throughout the state. So that's my short demo of Free Legal Answers. I'm going to sign out real quick, get back to that attorney registration page so I can drop that in the chat. But otherwise, I will stop talking so I can answer questions if anyone has questions about the platform. and you can feel free to drop questions in the chat or just unmute yourself.
I don't necessarily have a question, but I didn't want you to feel like there's no people. Like I had my video off because I was eating, but I think you sold this actually, and I am going to look into signing up for that. And then if I have a few minutes at my desk, I can just click in and see if there's something I can help with. So yeah, it doesn't sound like it would be a huge commitment, something you could do here and there when you can fit it in. So
yeah, there's no ongoing expectation of representation. The clients are given basically a limited scope. When they sign up, they essentially sign or agree to a limited scope. What you might see as a limited scope waiver, maybe at a help desk or something. So they understand that the person answering their question is not their attorney. On rare occasions, we have had attorneys have like lengthy back and forth with clients, walking them through each step of the thing, of whatever legal process they're going through, and then finally email us and be like, I've been talking to this client for 2 months. I really would like to help them. Can I take this case pro bono off the site? That's certainly not an expectation. We do ask that if anybody has a situation like that, they let us know to make sure that you continue to have malpractice coverage, because once any communication happens off the site, it's not covered by the ABA. But some people, it can be as much or as little as you make it, and it can be what you want it to be. And some people have had those experiences, and that's really great for them, but it's not expected, and it's not normal really for the platform. If you would like to answer a question, close it immediately and move on, that's completely your prerogative to do that.
yeah, thank you.
And I will say just one thing, the reason I linked the chat and keep pointing out that sort of gray tab at the top is because if you go to the main homepage before you sign in there's a big orange and a big blue button that say get started and sign in. If you start there, you will accidentally fill out a client registration. Hopefully you would be tipped off to that by the types of questions they're asking, the financial eligibility. But it's not immediately apparent if you're just like jumping in, like you're going to click on that big orange button. And that's not the one for you, for volunteers. So that's why I've stressed the attorney registration tab at the top. That's where you're going to go to get started.
Well,
and also, if anyone does have any questions after this, after you decide to get started and log on and start playing around, most of the PILI staff has experience with free legal answers, and we're all 100% happy to jump on a quick Zoom call and walk you through something or answer your questions. I think you'll see once you start using the site, you become a big fan of it and want to evangelize as much as possible. And that's definitely true for me. And it doesn't not only it doesn't bother me, I actually enjoy that aspect of it. So please feel free to reach out. I think Krista will be able to share mine and Michael's email addresses, and we will definitely make sure that if that one of us can log on and walk you through something. One other thing I would point out that I think I forgot is that the platform is for civil questions only. Criminal questions are not allowed on the platform, mainly because obviously people with criminal issues have the right to a public defender, so that's legal representation. But if you see something on the site that seems clearly inappropriate or like something that isn't intended for that platform, in every question, there's a big orange button at the top that says notify the state administrator about this question, and you can report it directly to us. We ask that you do that instead of answering the question and telling them this isn't appropriate, I can't help you, because once you answer the question, it counts against the 5 they can ask per year. But if we go in and withdraw it, it doesn't count against them for that. And so I just like to put that out there as another tool or resource that I think I forgot to point out.
And Abigail, I will definitely include your and Michael's email addresses when I send the link out to this recording. If there are no other questions, thank you so much. Of course, a train's going to go by right now. Thank you so much for presenting today and for moderating the recording. We really appreciate it. If there's no questions, I think that's a wrap on today's programming. And it looks like it. So thank you all. And thank you, Abigail. And thank you, Andrea, for coming. And thank you to all our fellows and supervisors. Have a good afternoon.